And I will end the war in Ukraine. Should have never started. If I were president, would have never started.
Donald Trump has long promised he could end the war in Ukraine on day one. Now he's tapped retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg to help him try to get that job done. Kellogg served as chief of staff on the National Security Council during the first Trump administration and was also Vice President Mike Pence's national security advisor. Let's bring in our reporter panel tonight, Tom LoBianco and Mia McCarthy. Tom is co-founder, national political reporter for 24-Site News, and Mia is politics reporter for Politico. Thank you both. Tom, let's start off with Trump's promise to end the wars abroad. What do you make of the pick of Keith Kellogg as special envoy for Ukraine and Russia as part of getting that job done?
Yeah, Kellogg's a very interesting selection coming out of the America First Policy Institute. Certainly, the first Trump administration. We all know him as then Vice President Mike Pence's national security advisor. But folks inside Trump world will tell you that he was an early supporter of Trump, and even during the Republican primary, he actually backed Trump over Pence. Now, he's a little bit more of a traditional, conservative war hawk, so to say. He does not seem to come out of that fold of Tucker Carlson, Tulsi Gabbard, Russia adjacent style. And it's certainly interesting seeing him picked over Rick Grinnell, who had been floated as that possibly for that envoy to Russia and Ukraine.
Did that selection surprise you at all?
Late in the game here, in these, as things have sort of normalized, so to say, and I use that term loosely, referring to all Trump administrations. But certainly after the Matt Gaetz kerfuffle, things have kind of settled a little bit. And the America First Policy Institute has kind of been the shadow White House, the White House in waiting. And he's been very close with that wing of Trump world. So this seems to signal more of a normalizing and a stabilizing of these elections.
Mia, I want to pivot to you. Your new reporting on Trump's incoming national security advisor designee working well with the current one, Jake Sullivan. It was a striking headline we saw from your reporting. Tell us more about it.
Sure. So Mike Waltz, he's a Florida congressman who's been tapped as Trump's national security advisor. He said in an interview over the weekend on Fox that he was working with current national security advisor Jake Sullivan. It was definitely, a little bit different than some of the headlines we've been seeing recently. But I think the message that Waltz was really trying to portray, especially to foreign adversaries, was that this is not a time for foreign adversaries to have any funny business going on. I think they were trying to portray the message that, they are working together. This is not a transitionary period of chaos, especially in regards to national security issues and especially in regards to our foreign adversaries.
It's been a real intense few weeks. You've been covering the Trump transition, and it's coming at us like a fire hose. We noted the recent estimated total of popular vote is that Donald Trump won by about 1.6% overall nationwide. And the Trump team argues that that's a mandate. Mia, what did the recent picks in this transition indicate to you about how he's going to govern with that mandate moving forward?
Yeah, I think these picks so far, especially, first with the Matt Gaetz kerfuffle, that was almost in some ways a way of testing that mandate. There were plenty of lawmakers that I had talked to who said that they were planning on supporting any, cabinet picks that Trump put forward because he had this mandate. Now, as you mentioned, that percentage of the quote unquote mandate has decreased slightly. And, there is questions over whether, it is truly a mandate. But I think regardless, Trump, for a lot of these Republicans who now have control of the House and the Senate, they still see that as a mandate. And it's going to be interesting in the next few weeks to see if these cabinet picks, especially other ones who are facing some other controversies like Pete Hegseth, RFK Jr., if they are, going to apply to this said mandate.
Tom, let me bounce that same question off of you. Are you detecting any roadmap Trump's laying out for how he's actually going to govern?
Roadmaps and Trump are not necessarily two things we consider together very often. But it has been very fascinating to me in terms of these nominations and the types of people who are being floated now, as Mia noted here, that A lot of it seems to be reflective of the Senate's response. I saw Jim Risch, who is, he's not a hardcore Trump loyalist, but certainly no softy when it, comes to the Senate Republicans, mentioning to a reporter recently, I think it was in regard to the Tulsi Gabbard nomination, saying, well, let's just see what happens after the hearings. And that goes to, just a few weeks ago, and this goes to the overall question of a mandate. Just a few weeks ago, you had a lot of the Trump folks saying, we're going to shove these nominations down the Senate's throat, and we will use recess appointments to do that. Now you don't hear that talk as much. So I think, again, reflective of the actual results themselves and the way that everybody is reacting to these things, you're starting to see a settling around Washington.
Well, things have settled sufficiently, Tom. The Democrats and members of the Harris campaign are finally speaking out with their diagnoses of what happened and what went wrong. I want to take a listen to some of what they said over the past 72 hours.
Republicans don't make Trump apologize. As Stephanie said, we don't have to mimic it. But I think that there are a lot of times where if you're in the Democratic Party and you step out of line, you get punished for it.
All right, Tom, what do you make of that?
Oh, that was very fascinating. I saw that podcast, and one of the things that was really interesting coming out of that, they talked at length further in the podcast about the trouble that they had on the campaign getting on some of these popular podcasts like Hot Ones. And a lot of podcasters were saying that they just didn't want to get involved in politics. And I think that this gets to, it's two different cultures. When you look at Democrats and Republicans, it gets to a lot of the problems that the Democrats and the center left are dealing with right now is how do you get through to culture, particularly in a time when Joe Rogan and Dana White and Theo Von are very much ensconced on the right and very happy to be a part of that, but not so much kind of your center-left podcasters. So they have some big problems to deal with.
To mention any number of progressives and Democrats tuning out politics right now because of the results of the election. And Mia, let me ask you this. We've heard so much about Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard to a degree. You're watching the transition and the choices from Donald Trump. Any other names that are on your radar as potential friction points when the new Congress takes over January 3rd?
Yeah, for sure. I think the main spotlight is definitely on the two of them. There have been, plenty of discourse about both of those picks from Democrats and even Republicans not necessarily fully supporting. So I think that's definitely where the main focus is going to be. But there are still going to be some other picks that, have some friction as they face Senate confirmation. I think one of those examples, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, I think Durbin, he had said he had some issues with her, and he does just need a full. She does just need a Republican majority to get through. So, assuming that Murkowski and Collins are behind her, I think with Gates, it does make it a little bit easier. But she is a Trump loyalist. She is someone who, has defended a lot of what Trump has said in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised if that caused some friction. And even RFK Jr., he has had some issues. He has had some friction within both parties as well.
And the senators know Pam Bondi. She was the defense attorney for Trump at that first impeachment trial before the Senate. Tom, I have just a moment left, so sorry to do this to you, but I'm going to do this to you. What Democratic lawmakers are you watching with aspirations over the next few months?
Yeah, absolutely. Hakeem Jeffries, very tight as minority leader, very tight margin, could become speaker depending upon the next election. But I'm watching a lot of the Gen Z folks, Maxwell Frost, Jasmine Crockett. There's been a big turning to the new generation after the election results. So those are two big names I'm keeping an eye on.
Two very effective messengers for the Democratic caucus so far in their careers. Tom LoBianco, Mia McCarthy, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.